All right, so let's go through one by one. Quick closing thought, idea, or question for the audience. And if there's still questions left in the audience that we haven't gotten to yet, now is your chance, so submit them. And maybe we'll start with Jonathan.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's really wonderful to see the space evolve and to see so many new actors come and develop an interest for supporting psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy. We are seeing more traditional market participants enter the market, and I think it's a great thing. It's also extremely important to have the grassroots movements who are also part of this community support this and continue to be a substantial influence in how we shape this industry going forward. So thank you.
Echoing Jonathan, it's super exciting to see an industry that is continuously defining itself and to be part of that movement that learns every single day and grows and gets some new learnings on a daily basis. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and so I would just add, I think this is pretty, for me, the most exciting time to be involved in biotech and drug development, and specifically around mental health care. And I'm just so grateful to be kind of a part of it. And hopefully, we can see some of these drugs get approved over the next several years, and hopefully have millions of patients benefit from them.
Covered here. Yeah, I guess being in venture capital, we hit on how our investment horizon is 10 years, and I know it's easy to get stuck in quarter to quarter looking at markets and ironically get a little depressed by that, given where things have been trading. But I do think the future really is bright. I think the mechanism of action around the serotonin 2A receptor, which really does seem to be the source of psychoactivity and therapeutic effect here, that has been tremendously de-risked. And looking forward to seeing the molecules that emerge. I guess one open topic I'll toss out there that I think needs to continue to be ruminated on is what does the commercial model look like for these therapies? And if we're just solving for efficacy and maximizing that, we may make the trade-off of not having a lot of patient access. And I do think those can at times be competing goals. So we're still trying to find the optimal point there, and no one has the perfect answer.
I don't really have anything to add. I mean, IP is both very important and also not important at all, because the best medicine is what science tells us, what these highly credentialed, peer-reviewed studies are going to show us. And applying that level of science is, I think, where the business should follow, where the medicine should follow.
Got one, thank you. Now, I've been a bench scientist now for over 10 years, and I am very heartened by the fact that this is the first time that I think in most of our lifetimes that we will be able to see a new therapy not only coming in and showing and reproving that this could be a viable medical treatment across so many different medical indications, but also pushing the bounds of new legal as well as regulatory pathways as well. So we really are at the forefront of such a beautiful, burgeoning new field here. So thank you so much.
Well, this is my third hurricane. I would say that this emotional perfect storm, this mental health perfect storm, is the biggest, most powerful one yet, probably because we're having global emotional climate change, and it's just, we can't ignore it anymore. And I think it's really exciting because we're all here in a new sort of vertical where every single person on the planet is a customer. Every single person on the planet needs what we're all trying to solve for. And everyone is a passionate advocate once they figure out that they can use their mind, to improve their own life. So it's important.
Thanks. One of the most powerful things you can do to make psychedelics legal and get the word out there is to tell your story. Tell your story to the people you know, tell your story to strangers, tell your story to people who say, hey, I hear you're into psychedelics. Can you tell me anything about them? If you go to Nikean.org and click Tell Us Your Story, we'll take care of the rest for you. And we'll give you a nice videotaped package you can share on social media, as well as we'll share on our website. So please, tell your story.
I'm going to brag about my wife, Claudia, who works at Johns Hopkins and does psychedelic guiding there, and has raised in the neighborhood of $15 million over the last 2 months for Roland Griffiths. For Claudia, what's the name of it? Professorship for Wellbeing and Spirituality. Roland is one of the most published researchers on both the clinical applications, but I say as or more importantly for those of us who recognize the real value in that experience on well-being and spirituality. And his desire to have a unit there that didn't simply study the medical benefits on treating disorders, but on the benefits for human flourishing. So thank you for Claudia for doing that.
I find it, I've been coming for a number of years, and really inspiring the increasing mainstreaming. I view it as like, psychedelics, if you were here 5 years ago, was a pretty small bubble. It was a really important bubble, and those in it are passionate and making a difference, but it was a small bubble. That bubble is expanding rapidly, and it's expanding in all sorts of different ways that ultimately will make a huge difference in both in patients as well as in the world in general. So I'm all for any things we can be doing to more normalize this, so that it's no longer something, you're at the Horizons conference, maybe you don't tell people about it, to something that everybody's proud of, and doing all we can to help advance this incredibly important work.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to make a personal note. In my career, there's 3 times where I had the clear experience that what I was doing made a difference. This is a phrase that's used a lot, made a difference. But specifically, I mean, if I hadn't been there, what happened would have happened eventually, but it would have happened later. One was having a role in bringing modern cataract surgery to the Indian subcontinent in the 70s and 80s. The second was doing some groundbreaking work on the economics of HIV/AIDS in Africa, and particularly interventions to prevent mother-to-child transmission of HIV. And the third one is having some small role in moving our agenda forward in making psychedelic-assisted therapies available to everybody who can benefit. And I feel extraordinarily lucky that I hit it right 3 times. And I'm just delighted and inspired to be with all of you and share our common purpose in making this happen.
This morning I had the pleasure of joining a panel discussion on values-driven approaches to psychedelic ventures. And I spoke about our psychedelic investing principles. And to be honest, I was apprehensive. I was a little worried about being criticized, that we weren't doing enough, that we're not getting a nuance wrong in one of the approaches that we have. And that wasn't the experience. Instead, I felt really a part of a really constructive dialogue, acknowledging that we don't have it right, acknowledging that there's more that we can all do, but being a part of the virtuous cycle that can really make a difference in the things we care about here. So thank you for the opportunity to be here and for being a part of that dialogue.
I don't have anything smart to add. I think everyone else is, it's hard being at the end. I feel sorry for you. I guess, the one reason why it's great for me to come to these events is because I sit in my basement studio writing newsletters about what's going on in the psychedelic space. And it's very easy to kind of sit at home and be cynical and critical. And even in my presentation this morning, maybe some of you came away thinking, oh, this guy's thinks that this is all junk and everything, this is all going to zero or anything. But I am obviously very excited. That's why I still do this. That's why every week I spend my Friday evenings writing about it. I think there's amazing minds in this room and so much energy to do things differently, which is super exciting for me. So thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks for Horizons for having me. And yeah, it's great to be in 3D, so thanks.
I really chose the wrong spot to stand. Honestly, standing here, it feels like I'm in a post-conflict reconstruction conference where, as the war on drugs and the hostilities begin to wane, we're building the peace. And what are the institutions for that peace? What's the governance model for that peace? What's the economy in that peace with drugs or peace with medicines, whatever you want to call them? And that's terribly exciting, and it's also hugely consequential, each of the decisions we make. So very proud to be here and building the peace with you all.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. It looks like our speakers did a really good job at satisfying all of our curiosities because there's only one question. So if you have any questions left, now's your chance, and we will dive back into payer coverage for a moment. The question's the following. Do you truly believe that payers are going to cover psychedelic-assisted therapy when SSRIs plus therapy are cheaper and more accessible? Any takers?
Yeah. I mean, you must be kidding me. They don't work. They have terrible side effects. And when you stop taking them, you get suicidal ideation. They work on less than 30% of people, only the extremely depressed. And look at how much they made. Let's see, $85 billion in mental health care medications last year. I think if they work, they're probably going to pay for them. And the comorbidity, like I said, and co-toxicity to every patient that also has mental health issues is off the charts. And I actually know the payers are here. They're here. They're funding stuff. They're funding research. The big payers, they're here. They're not probably going to pay for, 12 hours with 3 therapists for one person unless it can be proved that it saves them capital. But I always like to say, when people are like, oh, should we make this available in a pill? Well, if your granny's depressed, don't you want her to have something that she can take too? So the whole spectrum should be possible. But yes, I think it's going to be reimbursed.
Anyone else who wants to add?
I would say definitely yes, as data demonstrates. But the key in getting third-party payers reimbursing will be data, hard clinical data that is showing that there are higher rates of success, that the patients who are not being served, if you can deliver a few SSRIs and the person is no longer clinically ill, that'll continue to happen. But as data starts to demonstrate that patients who otherwise were not getting cured, not getting help, are now being helped, I see a tremendous amount of funding. And that's really, people talk a lot about equity. The only way to achieve real equity is when you have others paying so that it isn't just those who can afford the treatments. My thought.
One last thing I'll add to build off Dick's comment is you are seeing this theme of moving towards value-based care with payers away from fee-for-service. I mean, the incentive structure is so perverse around fee-for-service that doctors just get paid for people being sick, and I think insurers know that, and they do want to look at more holistic outcomes. So to the points made, I mean, the more data that's captured, the more multifactorial data, the better in a lot of ways, I'd say.
Yep. And I would just add that, I think for the drug developers that, reach that stage of commercialization, they need to be rational with the price that they charge. I think at the end of the day, even if it's a highly effective treatment, if the price that they're looking to charge is irrational, then I think there wouldn't be pushback.
Also, I don't think statins were reimbursed initially when they got approved, but once they hit the market and payers saw efficacy, they set the standard of care way cheaper. We think that's good enough. And they realized, holy crap, once it was commercialized, they were far and above the standard of care. They did start reimbursing. So even if it's not at the outset, that might get tinkered with. And we've even seen that with Spravato, from the get-go. It's a really messed up reimbursement model. They finally fixed that, and now it is starting to get traction. So I'll stop talking.
Going back to the molecules for a moment, the audience is wondering, why do we need new additional compounds given that there are so many excellent naturally occurring medicines? Can we get a mic to Shelby?
We think about it, we call them sort of like the classic psychedelics and sometimes like the second order compounds. And so, of course, the classic psychedelics they can be incredibly effective. And there are some things that can be non-ideal about them, depending on the application or the indication. So in some cases, you might be able to dramatically bring down the cost of care if the mechanism is a little shorter. So think about ketamine, for example, which is an hour, compared to, well, if we talk classic psychedelics, LSD is 12 hours, right? So if you're able to modulate that mechanism of action, that can have a major impact on the cost. Also, there can be some other side effects. So while psilocybin is generally very well tolerated, if you're taking it regularly, there's activity at the 5-HT2B receptor, and that can be associated with really major health outcomes. So anyone remembers the weight loss drug fen-phen, that had activity at 5-HT2B receptor, and so you can engineer that activity out. So there's lots of reasons why we can improve on some of these medicines. You mentioned statins. A classic case of the first statin that came out was actually far surpassed by something that just worked better. So I think that if some of these perform better, some of these different mechanisms, and also as some of the medicines might become more specific for specific indications, as opposed to just being really broad, again, thinking about SSRIs, I think there's a huge opportunity for these second-order medicines.
As someone who works with a classical psychedelic, I will say that people are dying right now, and they urgently need care, and the naturally occurring classical psychedelics we know mostly are very safe in controlled settings, and the urgency of that I think is paramount. And so while we may be able to improve these, I'm a scientist, I think we should always try that out. That's not a risk profile or additional cost or time I'm going to take, but we have tools that work, they come from nature, we know that they're safe, and it's incredibly important that we get those out.
Yeah, I think there's another part of that, which is essentially the care delivery portion. So, as Sheldon was saying, some of these psychedelics last for 8 hours. And that's a long time to be in a session with somebody. It's also very expensive for the patient. It's maybe not that interesting for some therapists. I mean, we see, therapists at Journey like working with ketamine because it's quite fast. And so will they, dedicate 8 hours of their day to doing a session with somebody? And so from a care delivery standpoint, from a cost standpoint for the patient, that's actually quite important to develop new compounds. And then on top of that, I think that, also as Shelby was saying, is that there are some of these compounds don't work for everybody. So having new compounds that could go to a broader population is actually really expanding access.
Interestingly, although I've spent most of my energy backing psilocybin research, this is simply a data point which is more confusing than anything else, but the king and the queen in the psychedelic tent are LSD and MDMA, and neither is a naturally occurring molecule. So I think that has certainly got something to do with this discussion.
And I would just add one additional point, that patients are different. Everyone has different biology, different needs, different reactions to different medications. So the greater the range of possible treatments for people, the higher the likelihood that we will address the needs of more people.
I endorse all those comments. And I'm a big proponent of looking for ways to reduce the cost of the therapies by, for example, having group sessions. And in spite of the fact that the costs are relatively high, even with group sessions, which would reduce the cost sums, really, those initial costs are overwhelmed by the savings in medical care costs, provided there's some durable benefit over a few years. The cost of treating people with severe PTSD or severe depression, for example, not just the psychiatric cost, but the total medical cost, is so huge, it tends to overwhelm the savings that you get in those upfront costs. I am not saying we shouldn't look for savings there, but what's more important is understanding or identifying therapies that provide drastic reductions in symptomatology and durable duration of benefit over multiple years. That's where the action is.
And staying with the king and the queen, Carrie, for a moment, there's also a question around what would sustainable business models with the classical compounds that are in the public domain look like? What's the key missing ingredient to make it work? I'm opening up to anyone, but you're free to take it. What would business models leveraging the existing classical psychedelics look like? LSD, MDMA?
Yeah, my focus is on federal rescheduling of a classic psychedelic as soon as possible. I think everything hinges on that. I think the campaigns to create ballot initiatives several years ago, those would have gone nowhere, and they all depend upon the hard science coming out of peer-reviewed journals. And so, in terms of sustainable model, I frankly can't see beyond FDA, NDA, ASAP. NDA is new drug approval. FDA, NDA, ASAP, before something goes wrong. So, sustainable business model, that has to be the tip of the spear. That's what's dragging everything behind it. And so that would be mine.
All right.
I don't see a business model with, let's call them public molecules, where one person or one small group of people can make $1 billion, but 1 million people can make a living by providing therapeutic services to their fellow population. It's absolutely a sustainable business model. It just has to be legal.
I would say we already have that model. We have it in surgery and other procedures. And these are great jobs that you can't automate and you can't outsource. And so why are we afraid of a world where we have locally owned centers and locally owned, like local operators that look like the communities that they're trying to treat, and they're capturing a lot, maybe not most of the value that's being created? I think that's a very bright future.
It's a great point. The delivery of care is absolutely a sustainable business model. It may not be sort of a venture scale model, depending on how things work. Journey Clinical is a good example of that. But depending on geography, maybe not in the U.S., but a number of compounds, classically and naturally occurring, are legal in many jurisdictions around the world. And so, as there a proliferation of really high quality care in those jurisdictions, that's absolutely a sustainable business model.